It's election night here in Pennsylvania, waiting for the results to come in as we speak. You are listening live to the broadcast here on WHIP Radio, Philly's #1 college radio station. Myself, Ryan Frascella, alongside John Cole. And we are now fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Terry Madonna from Franklin and Marshall. Dr. Madonna is the director of the Center for Politics and Public Affairs, as well as a professor of public affairs and the director of the Franklin and Marshall College Poll. Dr. Madonna, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And so I want to start out, I wanted to talk about the latest Franklin and Marshall College Poll. Ted Cruz just pulled ahead of John Kasich. Do you think both will be able to receive delegates tonight in the race?
Yeah, well, as you know, the sort of wild and woolly primary process on the Republican side for delegates is a bit unusual. In fact, it's the most unusual process of any state in the country. 54 delegates get elected to go to the There's 71 in total Republican delegates who will go to the Cleveland Convention in the third week of July. 17 will go with the popular vote winner. So virtually every poll has Donald Trump ahead, by the way. At this point, the range is from about 40 to 51% of the vote over the polls that were done over the last 2 weeks. So it's Trump's likely to win the 17. Now we get to these 54. We have 18 congressional districts. I think you are sitting in Congressman Fatah's.
That is correct.
Yeah, CD number 2. So the Republican voters there will go into the polling booth if they haven't gone already, and they will see a list of delegate candidates to represent the Republicans from that district. Three of them, the 3 highest vote getters, will go to the convention. So, and that process goes on in 17 other congressional districts. But here's the rub. None of them, regardless of who they say they will vote for, and many have come out. Many have said, I'm voting for Trump, I'm voting for Cruz, I'm voting for Kasich. Many have said, if the popular vote winner is Trump, I'll vote for Trump. If it's Kasich, I'll vote for Kasich, meaning in that congressional district. But here's the rub. They're not legally bound by any convention rule. They can do whatever they want on the first and any ballot. Now remember, that goes through all 18 CDs, 54 unbound. And many voters will go into the polling booth today and not know what the delegate they may have voted for is likely to do. Now, there have been some outreach by, the delegate candidates and particularly the Cruz people putting out slate cards. So maybe when Republican voters went to vote in your CD, they got handed a card and says, vote for, I'm making this up now, Mary Doe pledged to Donald Trump. You follow me?
Yeah.
So that's a very unusual process, and it becomes a big wild card.
And so you're talking about the kind of delegates who've pledged, some not bound, but I want to talk about the supporters. Do Donald Trump's supporters seem kind of plentiful, like they're sticking with him? His support certainly has increased to 36% in the latest Franklin and Marshall poll from 24% just in January.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And here's what I think we underestimated because of how Trump's campaign is going. When Donald Trump announced very shortly after he got about a third of the Republican vote, and remember at one point there was 17 people in total seeking the Republican nomination. He got about a third, and it varies, in a couple of states it might go up a little bit and down a little bit. Every now and then he would say something controversial like, well, Senator McCain, John McCain is not a war hero, and you go, oh my gosh, did he really say that? Or what about Carly Fiorina's face? I mean, in this age, talking about a woman's face.
Sure.
And yet, experts like me said, he's done, he's gone, he can't survive, thinking that old Howard Dean, back in 2004, only let out a scream after he came in fourth in the Iowa caucus.
Yeah.
That guy, what happened to him, right, guys?
Yeah.
So, and it didn't happen. So you're onto a great question. He's got this durable vote that's now inching up above the 1/3 category. You know what I mean? And it sticks with him no matter what he says. So in our primary today, he's got I would be stunned if he doesn't come out of this primary with some, between 40 and 50% of the vote. Kasich and Cruz are hanging around in the mid-20s, depending on the poll, inching up into the high 20s, and they're very close together. But coming in second or third at this point, if you don't win any delegates, is relatively meaningless. And there are 5 states in play today. Donald Trump leads in every one of them. Every single one of them. In fact, he's likely to pick up at the end of the day somewhere between 90 and 100 delegates.
Wow.
If not more. And he's only about 400 short of the magic 1237. So at the end of the day, he could be only about 300 delegate votes short of getting the magic 1237.
Now, it's interesting that let's stick to the GOP conversation.
Sure.
And Donald Trump, again, has kind of defied all logic in this election cycle. And as we talked on our show the month leading into this, me and Ryan are both from the state of Pennsylvania. I live in Philadelphia. And Donald Trump even has a good amount of support within the city of brotherly love, although we understand that this is a town where a Democrat is going to win the election.
Sure.
But I find it very fascinating, a two-part question. One, why is John Kasich not polling higher than I anticipated? Because just a month ago, I thought that the electorate of Pennsylvania would find Kasich more favorable, considering, one, he's from McKees Rocks out in western Pennsylvania, and I find the electorate of Ohio and Pennsylvania to be somewhat similar. So, one, why is Kasich not polling as well, as really not distancing himself from Senator Cruz? And two, if Trump were to be the nominee for the GOP in November, and this is months down the line, I understand polls will change greatly from now until then, but could Trump win the state of Pennsylvania?
All right, let's start with the first question. In fact, in the poll we did here at Franklin and Marshall, we were out in the field when, Kasich wins Ohio, Rubio drops out. He needs the beneficiary of that victory, and picked up some of Rubio's support. So a lot of Kasich supporters were optimistic. But then after that, he's not won a single contest. Not one. His delegate vote count is something like 173. He's not picked up any momentum. And he's been mathematically eliminated for a fairly long period of time, mathematically eliminated from winning on the first ballot. So I think what happened to Kasich is that a lot of his people who might have supported him, some came over to Cruz to stop Trump. Some, may have just simply changed their mind about what they're likely to do altogether. But you're right about it. That Pennsylvania and Ohio have, in some respects, some similar demographics. Kasich in the polls, by the way, is competing pretty well down in the Philly suburbs, where you got voters who tend to be more moderate. We're talking about Republican voters, not as conservative, where they tend to be a little more upscale. Many with college educations, many with incomes that are fairly decent. And Kasich's best strength comes down in your region of the state, in the southeast. And as you pointed out, he's from McKees Rocks, outside of Pittsburgh, and he does, in one poll, led in Allegheny County. I'm talking about Kasich. But Trump is competing fairly well with him in the southeast. He's not, whether he wins or not remains to be seen, but Trump has gained momentum as it appears that Kasich has nowhere to go. So I think a lot of his voters say, well, where do we go with this? Do a third, fourth ballot?
Yeah.
Not a lot of people think that way. I mean, I think people say, well, I want to vote for a winner. I want to vote for somebody who has a chance. And Kasich just doesn't have the momentum that he had a month ago. And Trump and Cruz, I think, did pick up a fair amount of anti-Trump support, and that's also helped him. But today is going to be Donald Trump Day. The only question is, moving forward, is there a narrative that can, and something that the two can do that will hold off the magic 1237? And what they tried to do was, Cruz says, I'll stay in Indiana. Kasich, you go out in Oregon and New Mexico and campaign where both have a better chance of winning, and you saw that fall apart already.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
and now your second question. Yeah, we're pretty far off. I'll hold off my judgment until after the conventions, and we'll get into the August polls. I say this: is he likely to win Pennsylvania? No. Remember, among all voters, he's between 60 and 70% negative in his popularity, or in polling terms, his unfavorables. Even and you get in some polls 25-30% of Republicans say they won't vote for him. Republicans. We're talking about Trump. Now, all bets are off. I mean, we need to get in through the conventions and see where this all goes.
And before we touch on the Senate race on the Democratic side, is it pretty much locked up in Pennsylvania for Hillary Clinton?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, she's got these connections that won't quit. You know, her dad was born in Scranton. Actually, her grandfather was. Her father played football for Penn State, moved to Illinois. They maintained a cottage up outside of Scranton, on Lake Winola. Her two brothers still own it. And she spent time growing up there. You know, and she has these Scranton roots. Her daughter Chelsea's married to the son of Marjorie Margolis, Mark Myslinski. And how many times has Clinton spent? And you know this from where you are. Look at the amount of time over the decades they spent in Philadelphia, building relationships, developing friendships. I mean, in terms of the demographics, this fits Hillary quite well. I mean, she wins women voters. She wins seniors over Sanders. We live in the fourth oldest state in the union. She wins minority voters, gets almost 60% of the total, probably will end up with more than that. What do we know about Philadelphia? More than half of the votes today will be minority, right?
Sure, yeah.
So when you look at the demographics, this is, and you know, she also wins Catholics, and we have a higher proportion of Catholics in Pennsylvania than nationwide. So when you take women, Catholics, minorities, seniors, you get my point.
Yeah.
Building up a lot of, and yeah, Bernie, we know where Bernie's going to win. He's going to win the millennials, right?
Yeah.
But they're going to be 12-13% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I just said? 12 or 13% of the vote. Now he leads her. He's up into the 60s in the polls with millennials, and he spent a good bit of time. I think he was down at Temple, right?
He was, yes.
Yeah.
You know where else he was? Penn State.
Yeah.
Pitt.
Yep.
Spending his time at the universities.
Yeah.
Gettysburg, Millersville University.
Which was very surprising to me. Gettysburg does not really seem like his sort of clientele, southwestern Pennsylvania, but I get it is a college campaus, so I do.
Tulsi, I believe Representative Tulsi Gabbard joined him there as well, actually, from the state of Hawaii, as a matter of fact, at that campaign stop.
We have, I think I'm right about this, the third largest number of colleges and universities in the country. California, New York exceed us, over 100. But, you know, he's probably doing better staying at places like Temple and Pitt and Penn State and Millersville, because the state-related, the first three I mentioned, state-owned school, Millersville, tend to have a higher proportion of in-state people. I think you would agree, than some of the private schools. But I think the point is, Bernie Sanders appeals to two groups in the main: millennials and then blue-collar working-class voters who feel that the recession isn't over, that times have left them behind. So he tends to do much better among that segment of the electorate. In fact, in some respects, among Democrats, the same as Donald Trump does among Republicans. And that Sanders' appeal about Wall Street and the money managers and the rigged system and all of that appeals to that part of the electorate. And Sanders has done well in the previous states in that demographic.
Now, bringing it to one of the more closely watched, I'd say, Senate races in the nation will be right here in the state of Pennsylvania. And our show for Rational Radio, we've had the pleasure of interviewing Katie McGinty, John Fetterman, and Joe Sestak.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we've had the pleasure of talking to all of them. Of course, today the showdown's going on. We'll find out tonight who will be representing the Democratic Party up against Senator Toomey, who did vote for Ted Cruz today. But I want to talk to you about the polling I find very fascinating. Just a couple weeks ago, a month ago, when we started our interviews, Joe Sestak had a sizable lead over Katie McGinty. It seemed like he distanced himself enough where the name recognition would carry him over to ultimately not winning easily, but having a sizable margin of victory over runner-up Katie McGinty. And with McGinty racking up all the key endorsements in the Democratic Party, we understand that Joe Biden was campaigning for in the state of Pennsylvania in the past couple of weeks, Barack Obama endorsing her. She is the establishment's pick, and as of late, her numbers have surged upwards, and now it's very competitive. I want your, what you think of. What do you think is going to happen with Sestak versus McGinty? And not to write off Fetterman, but he seems to be a distant third as of now.
Right. Well, I think you hit on. I would mention two things. One is this tremendous number of endorsements that she's gotten. She's got a list of unions and party organizations that you fill a small book. Virtually every major union in the state, virtually every major politician in the state, let's go out of the state, the president of the United States. And I guess we have to, we'll take Joe Biden. I hope our friends in Delaware don't get upset. He was born in Scranton and lived there until he was 10. And I'll tell you a little story. Arlen Specter and Biden got to be pretty close friends when they were in the Senate together. And Arlen, I think, used to drive Republicans crazy when he would refer to Biden as Pennsylvania's third senator. So you can imagine that's a wonderful story that Arlen Specter used to tell, talking about our former U.S. senator. At any rate, she's got this ton of endorsements, and as you point out, major politicians around the around the country and in state campaigning for her. She's got a lot of energy that she's exhibited. Her campaign has over the last month or so, and then there's something else. An infusion, and I'll underestimate this because the final numbers aren't in. $4 million into her campaign. Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, $1.5 million. Emily's List, over $750,000. And you can't turn on a commercial and not see her.
Yeah.
And so there's two things going on. All of that organizational support and effort that will turn into grassroots support. And secondly, she's omnipresent throughout in the media. And this is a television and radio state. I mean, you just have to be there or you're gonna have trouble. This is a huge state. And Sestak, though he has, he had a couple million on hand, and you see some of his commercials, and he doesn't have a well span of support, particularly in the heartland of the state. He'll do well in Delaware County, where he was a two-term member of Congress. But and he walked the state for 5 years. I think the guy wore out 5 pair of sneakers, walking around the state, building up lots of alliances and friendships. I joke and say any place 5 Democrats would meet, Sestak would show up. Yeah. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, because he's an indefatigable campaigner, a maverick. The Democratic establishment doesn't like him for something, his decision to run against Arlen Specter in 2010 when Specter changed his party from Republican to Democrat, and the Democratic leaders wanted Specter, not Sestak. He ran anyway and beat him in the Democratic primary. But having said that, McGinty is on his heels. It wouldn't shock me if she were to win. Again, you're absolutely right. Even as late as a couple weeks ago, some of the polls had it even, and my poll had her still behind. Now, they were in single digits, but still behind Joe Sestak. The other thing that she's done that's fairly important, she has tied her message to the same message that Hillary Clinton's using. She talks a lot about, women's issues, the wage gap. I mean, literally. And by the way, she's endorsed her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
McGinty has endorsed her. Sestak, no one. Fetterman, Bernie Sanders. So it wouldn't shock me if McGinty wins. I mean, it could be close. And we'll have to see what happens, with the overall turnout on the Democratic side, where voters turn out. But she's, I think, well-positioned organizationally and through her media campaign to pull off this come-from-behind victory.
And one final question here, Dr. Madonna, before we let you go, turning to a race that's a little bit closer to home, and that one is the race for Pennsylvania Attorney General. Attorney General Kathleen Kane has announced she is not seeking re-election after she has been embattled with many, many controversies throughout her term as Attorney General. What do you think the race is shaping up there? How is it shaping up? John Rafferty seems, at least what I've seen, seems to have a lead here, at least in the Southeast. And I've seen Steven Zappala gaining steam on both kind of ends of the state.
Yeah, well, the Republican Party, Rafferty, is the state senator and, likely to win that race. Joe Peters is a longtime prosecutor, certainly well qualified. I don't think that's even an issue. The question is whether he has the money and the reach to move beyond Rafferty, who received a Republican Party endorsement. It would be tough for Peters. These races aren't often, as you know, about qualifications.
Sure.
Right? They're about organizational party and party support. And the Democratic contest, most of us so-called experts thought that Shapiro would have an easy time of it. Was a House member, a very popular county commissioner, and from where you sit in neighboring Montgomery County, where as chairman of the board, he put the county in pretty good stead fiscally, and has done some other things that have been well received. But I think what sort of struck, what happened was that the two Philadelphia city leaders, Bob Brady, the city chairman, who's also the congressman from the 1st Congressional District, and Johnny Doherty, the powerful labor leader, ended up endorsing Zappala, as did the Philadelphia City Committee, Democratic Committee. And plus, Zappala has a lot of support out where he's from in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny County. 11 county commissioners out there have endorsed him. I thought it was going to be a Southeast versus Southwest contest.
Yeah.
It may still be. Shapiro seems to have a lot of support more broadly based in the state. And there are some members of Philly City Council who've endorsed Josh. And there's been no polling in it that I've seen. Now, there's been one poll that Shapiro campaign released done by, I think, Harper polling that shows Josh Shapiro ahead. But let me just end on this. The two of them have two different visions of the office. For Zappala, it's about the prosecutor, although he has not been in the courtroom himself in a couple of decades, but he runs a prosecutorial office,
right.
DA Allegheny County. But this is what that office needs. Shapiro, it needs a reform-minded manager, given what happened with Kane. We need to get the morale back. We need to get systems operating. We need to get decision-making. We need to end all the feuding and the lawsuits by people who work in the AG's office against Kane.
Yeah.
As well as people outside of the office. So we see two very, very different visions of the office. And then there's a third candidate, John Morganelli. He's the DA in Northampton County, longtime DA, prosecuted a bunch of murder cases. He's run a number of times. This seems to everybody like a two-person race. It's too, without any polls and without any real sense except what I've described to you, I'll hold my judgment until the voters speak by 8 o'clock this evening.
Yeah, just something very interesting to keep our eyes on. A lot of people concerned that Josh Shapiro has had no real kind of courtroom experience.
That's a great point. I should have mentioned that. That's right. But again, that goes to Shapiro's vision. Look, this isn't about being in court. There are 830 people who work in the Attorney General's office. Now, not all of them are lawyers in court.
Yeah.
But if you get the right management in there, they'll be effective. They know what they're doing in the courtroom. And so that's the point I tried to make about the vision of whether you need a reform-minded, straighten-up-the-office guy or a prosecutor. But you're absolutely right. That's one of the issues that particularly Zappala has been using in the course of the campaign.
So we will see how that one plays out when the results start to come in after 8 o'clock p.m. tonight. Dr. Terry Madonna, thank you so much for joining us, helping us break down this race.
My pleasure. You have a good one.